He inherits an old farm, then finds an Apache warrior hanged inside. He had never imagined that a simple letter could change his life so much. Ethan was an ordinary man living in a busy city, working long hours in an office job that never seemed to end. He had a small apartment, a few close friends, and a quiet routine. He did not own much, and he did not expect much. But then one day, he received a letter that made him stop and read it twice. The letter was from a law firm he had never heard of. It was written in a formal tone and explained that Ethan had inherited a property from a relative he barely knew. The name on the letter was the same as his own, but the person it belonged to was someone he had never met. The letter said the relative had died suddenly, and the only thing left behind was an old farm in a remote part of the Southwest. The farm had been in the family for a long time, but nobody had lived there for years. Ethan had never even been there. At first, Ethan thought it was a mistake. He tried to ignore it, thinking it might be a scam, but the letter was official, with stamps and signatures and a clear explanation of what was happening. The more he read, the more he realized it was real. The farm was now his. He sat down on the edge of his bed and stared at the paper. The idea of owning a farm was strange. He had never grown anything in his life. He had never cared for animals. He barely knew how to change a tire. Farming was not part of his world. Yet the letter made it clear that he had a choice. He could sell the farm or he could keep it. Ethan felt a mix of emotions. He was confused, curious, and a little scared. The farm was far away in a place he had never visited. It was not a modern property. It was old, with buildings that looked like they belonged to another time. The thought of walking into a house that had been empty for years made him feel uneasy. But there was also something exciting about it. He had always wanted to escape the city for a while, even if just for a weekend. Now he had a reason to go somewhere new. For days, Ethan thought about what he should do. He talked to his friends, who were surprised and a little jealous. Some of them said he should sell the farm and take the money. Others told him to go and see it first. His friends knew he was tired of his job and the constant noise of the city. They thought the farm might be a fresh start. Ethan also thought about his relative. He had heard stories about the family, but the details were vague. The relative who owned the farm had lived a quiet life and rarely talked to anyone. Ethan did not know why the farm was left to him. The letter did not explain that part. It simply said that the relative wanted Ethan to have it. As the days passed, Ethan began to feel a growing pull toward the farm. He started imagining what it would be like to live there. He pictured wide open land, quiet nights, and fresh air. He imagined waking up early, working outside, and feeling tired in a different way than he was used to. The thought of leaving the city behind, even for a short time, began to feel like a dream. Finally, he made a decision. He would go to the farm and see it for himself. He would stay for a week, clean the place, and decide what to do next. He told his boss he needed time off and explained it as a family matter. His boss did not ask many questions. Ethan packed a few clothes, some basic tools, and a small bag of supplies. He drove out of the city early in the morning when the roads were still quiet. The drive was long. The city slowly faded behind him, replaced by wide fields and empty land. The air felt different. It was cleaner, cooler, and quieter. As he drove, Ethan noticed how small the world seemed compared to the city. The buildings were far apart. There were no traffic lights, no busy streets, and no crowds. The land stretched out for miles, and the sky looked bigger than he had ever seen it. After several hours, he reached the edge of a small town. The town was quiet and simple. There were a few stores, a gas station, and a diner where people sat and talked quietly. Ethan stopped to buy food and ask for directions. He asked the cashier about the farm and the old property. The cashier looked at him for a moment, then lowered his voice. "The old farm?" the man asked. "That place has been empty for years. Not many people go out there anymore." Ethan felt a strange chill. "Is it safe?" he asked. The man hesitated. "It's safe enough, but it's not a friendly place. The land has a history. People around here don't talk about it much." Ethan felt his curiosity grow even stronger. He thanked the man and continued his drive. The road became rougher and less maintained. The trees were fewer and the land looked more open. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky turned orange and pink. Ethan felt a strange feeling in his chest, like he was entering a different world. When he finally arrived at the farm, he was surprised by how old it looked. The house was small and made of weathered wood. The paint had peeled off long ago. The roof looked worn and the windows were dusty. The fence around the property was broken in places. The barn was large but looked like it had been left alone for a long time. There were tools scattered around, covered in rust. The land was dry and dusty, with patches of grass that had grown wild. Ethan stepped out of his car and took a deep breath. The air smelled of dry soil and old wood. The silence was almost loud. There were no sounds of people, no cars, no music, only the wind and the occasional call of a bird. He walked toward the house and tried the front door. It was locked. He tried the back door and it opened with a creak. The inside of the house was dark and dusty. Sunlight came through the windows, making the dust float like tiny stars in the air. The furniture was old and covered in sheets. The floors were covered in dirt. The walls were cracked and the smell of old wood filled the room. Ethan walked through the room slowly. He felt like he was stepping into a place frozen in time. There were old photographs on the walls, faded and yellowed. He saw pictures of people he did not recognize. He saw an old family portrait with serious faces. The images made him feel like he was walking through someone else's life. He walked into the kitchen. The sink was rusty and the cabinets were empty. There was a table with old chairs around it. He imagined how the room might have looked years ago when it was full of life. He could almost hear the sound of people talking and laughing, but now it was quiet and empty. Ethan decided to start cleaning. He knew it would take time, but he wanted to make the place livable. He opened the windows and let the fresh air in. He swept the floors and removed broken items. He found old tools and boxes of things that looked like they had been forgotten. He felt a strange connection to the place, even though he had only just arrived. As he worked, he kept thinking about the warning from the man at the store. The land has a history. What did that mean? Why did people avoid the farm? He had always believed that old stories were just stories, but now he wondered if there was more to it. That night, Ethan slept in one of the old rooms. He set up a small bed and covered himself with a blanket. The house creaked as the wind moved through the cracks. The sounds were unfamiliar, and he found it difficult to sleep. Every little noise seemed louder in the silence. In the morning, he woke up early. He looked outside and saw the sun rising over the land. The light made everything look different. The dry soil looked golden, and the shadows of the trees stretched across the ground. Ethan felt a calmness he had not felt in a long time. He realized he was beginning to understand why people might want to live in a place like this. He walked outside and began to explore the property. He walked around the barn and the other buildings. He noticed that the land was not as empty as it seemed. There were signs of life even if it was small. He saw tracks in the dirt, likely from animals. He saw plants growing in places where they should not have been able to survive. The land was alive in its own way. As he walked, he noticed something strange. Near the barn, there was a small pile of rocks that looked like it had been placed carefully. He had no idea why it was there. He felt a sudden feeling of unease, but he could not explain why. He continued walking, telling himself it was just his imagination. When he returned to the house, he decided to explore the barn. The barn door was heavy and difficult to open, but he pushed it with all his strength. The door creaked loudly as it opened. Inside, the barn was dark and full of old equipment. There were empty stalls and old hay scattered on the floor. The air smelled like dust and old animals. Ethan turned on his flashlight and walked deeper into the barn. He looked at the walls and the ceiling, trying to find anything that might be useful. He found old tools and pieces of metal. He found broken crates and old sacks. He felt like he was walking through a place that had been abandoned for a long time. Then he noticed something unusual. At the far end of the barn, there was a door he had not seen before. It was smaller than the others and looked like it had been hidden. The door was closed, and it did not look like it had been used recently. Ethan felt a strange sense of curiosity. He walked toward it slowly. He reached the door and placed his hand on the handle. It was cold. He hesitated for a moment, then turned the handle and opened it. The door creaked, and a small amount of light entered the space behind it. Inside was a room that looked like it had been built to hide something. The walls were made of old wood, and the room was small and narrow. Ethan shined his flashlight around the room. His heart began to beat faster. He saw something that made his breath stop. In the center of the room, hanging from a beam, was a figure. At first, Ethan thought it was a mannequin or an old scarecrow. But as he looked closer, he realized it was not. The figure was real, and it had been there for a long time. It was a person dressed in traditional clothing with patterns and markings on the fabric. The body looked old, but it was still there, hanging in a way that made Ethan feel sick to his stomach. He stepped back, unable to move. His mind raced with questions. Who was this person? Why was he here? How had he been left like this? The room felt cold, even though the air outside was warm. Ethan felt a wave of fear and confusion. He took a deep breath and forced himself to look again. The person had long hair and markings on his face. The clothing looked like something from a different time, a time long before Ethan was born. The body was still, but the presence of it made the room feel heavy. Ethan felt like he had stepped into a secret that had been hidden for years. His mind filled with thoughts he did not want to have. He wondered if the body was a sign of something terrible that had happened on the land. He wondered if the stories people told about the farm were true. He felt a cold fear that he could not explain. Ethan closed the door slowly and stepped back into the barn. He stood there for a long time, trying to understand what he had seen. He felt like the world had changed in a single moment. The farm was no longer just an old property. It was a place with a secret, and the secret was now his to carry. He left the barn and walked back to the house, his mind racing. He did not know what he would do next. He felt a strange mix of fear and responsibility. The discovery had changed everything. He had come to the farm to escape his life, but now he was facing something he could not ignore. As the sun began to set again, Ethan sat in the old house and stared at the walls. He tried to calm himself, but the image of the hidden room stayed in his mind. He knew that he would not be able to forget what he had seen. The farm was no longer just a place he had inherited. It was a place that had a story, and he had just become a part of it. He did not sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of the hidden room and the hanging figure. The house felt different now, as if it had been waiting for him to find something. He tried to tell himself it was just an old body, something left behind long ago. But his mind refused to accept that. The memory stayed in his head, moving like a shadow he could not escape. When the morning came, Ethan woke up early. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The sunlight came through the window and made the dust in the air shine like tiny particles of gold. The calm light seemed to contradict the feeling inside him. He felt nervous and restless. He knew he had to do something, but he did not know what. He decided to go back to the barn. He needed to look again to be sure of what he had seen. He needed to understand. He got dressed, grabbed his flashlight, and walked outside. The air was cool and the land looked quiet and peaceful. It was hard to believe that the place held such a dark secret. As he walked toward the barn, he tried to think clearly. He told himself that he might be imagining things. Maybe the body was a prop, something left by someone as a joke. Maybe it was a statue or a model. But deep inside, he knew it was not. The feeling in his chest told him it was real. When he reached the barn, he paused. He looked at the building and felt a strange hesitation. The door was still there, old and heavy. He pushed it open again, and the sound echoed through the empty space. He walked inside and felt the dust rise around him. He moved toward the hidden door at the far end, his footsteps slow and careful. He opened the door and stepped into the small room. The air inside was cooler and the smell was stronger. The body was still there, hanging in the same place. Ethan stood still, staring at it. He felt a wave of sadness and anger at the same time. He did not know the person, but he could not ignore the way he had been left. He walked closer, trying to look for clues. He shined his flashlight on the clothing. The fabric was old and faded, but the patterns were still visible. The designs looked like they belonged to a culture that had a long history. The person's hair was long and dark. The skin looked dark as well. Ethan could see that the person was not a modern man. He was from a time long ago. Ethan's mind began to race. He remembered the warning from the man at the store. The land has a history. Now he understood that the history was not just a story. It was real, and it was here, inside the barn. He decided to take photos. He pulled out his phone and began to take pictures of the body and the room. He wanted to document everything in case he needed to show someone later. He took pictures of the patterns on the clothing, the markings on the skin, and the way the body was positioned. He tried to be careful not to touch anything. The room felt fragile, like it had been untouched for many years. After taking the photos, Ethan left the barn and went back to the house. He sat at the old kitchen table and looked at the pictures on his phone. The images made him feel even more uneasy. The person looked like he had been a warrior or a leader. The clothing was not simple. It was decorated and detailed. The markings on the skin looked like symbols, like something with meaning. Ethan knew he needed help. He could not solve this on his own. He needed someone who knew about history and culture. He needed someone who could tell him who the person was and why he was there. But he did not know who to ask. He thought about the people in the nearby town. He could go to the library or the local museum. He could ask the older residents who had lived there for years. He could also contact the authorities, but he was not sure if that was the right step. He did not want to cause trouble or bring attention to the farm, but he also did not want to ignore the discovery. After thinking for a long time, Ethan decided to visit the local library. He believed that a library could provide him with information without making the situation public. He drove to the town and parked near the small building. The library was quiet, with a few people reading and working. The librarian looked friendly and welcomed him with a smile. Ethan explained that he had inherited an old farm and had found something unusual. He did not go into details at first. He asked if the librarian could help him find information about the history of the land and the local tribes. The librarian listened carefully and then nodded. "There is history here," she said softly. "This area has been home to different people for a long time. Many stories are not written down, some are passed through families, but there are records you can look at." She showed him books and maps. Ethan spent hours reading about the land, the people who had lived there, and the conflicts that had occurred. He learned that the area had been part of a territory where Native American tribes once lived. He learned that there had been battles, forced relocations, and broken promises. He learned that many families had lost their homes and their loved ones. The more he read, the more he felt a heavy sadness. He had never thought about the land in this way. He had always seen it as empty and quiet. Now he understood that it had a history of pain and struggle. He began to realize that the person in the barn might be connected to that history. After leaving the library, Ethan decided to talk to people who had lived in the town for a long time. He walked to a small diner and sat at the counter. The place smelled like coffee and warm bread. An older man sat at the end of the counter, drinking his coffee slowly. Ethan decided to talk to him. He introduced himself and asked if the man knew anything about the old farm. The man looked at him carefully and then sighed. "That place has always been quiet," the man said. "Not in a good way. People used to talk about strange things happening out there, but nobody went near it. It was just easier to avoid it." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of strange things?" The man hesitated, then spoke slowly. "People said they heard noises at night. Some said they saw lights. Others said they felt like they were being watched. But the worst thing was the story about the hanging. People said someone was found hanging there many years ago." Ethan's heart began to race. He did not want to believe it, but the man's words matched what he had seen. He asked the man if he knew anything more. The man shook his head. "Nobody talks about it. The families here don't want to bring it up. They say it is bad luck." Ethan thanked the man and left the diner. His mind was full of questions. The more he learned, the more he felt the weight of the situation. He realized that the farm was not just an old property. It was a place that held a secret that people had tried to forget. When he returned to the farm, he felt different. The land no longer felt quiet. It felt watched. He walked around the property and looked at the buildings again. The wind moved through the trees, and the sound seemed louder than before. He felt as if the land itself was speaking to him. Ethan decided to contact the authorities. He did not know if it was the right step, but he felt he could not keep the discovery to himself. He called the local sheriff's office and explained what he had found. The person on the phone listened carefully and then asked for details. The sheriff said he would send someone to investigate. Ethan felt relieved and nervous at the same time. He did not want the farm to become a public scene, but he also wanted the truth to be known. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He kept thinking about the body and the stories he had heard. He wondered who the person was and why he had been left there. He felt a deep sadness for the unknown man who had died in such a lonely place. In the early morning, he heard a car drive up the road. He looked out the window and saw a sheriff's vehicle parked near the house. A deputy stepped out and walked toward the door. Ethan opened the door and greeted him. The deputy introduced himself and asked to see the barn. Ethan led him to the hidden room. The deputy's face changed when he saw the body. He looked shocked and then serious. He told Ethan to stay calm and asked him a few questions. The deputy took notes and took photos. He then said he would call the sheriff and wait for more officers. Ethan felt a mix of relief and fear. He was glad someone was taking it seriously, but he also felt like he had opened a door that could not be closed. He wondered what would happen next. As the deputy left to wait for the sheriff, Ethan stood alone in the barn. The air felt heavy. He looked at the body again and felt a strange connection. He did not know the man, but he felt that the man's story was not finished. The discovery had become more than a mystery. It had become a responsibility. He walked back to the house and sat down. He thought about the people he had spoken to, the stories he had heard, and the information he had found. He knew that the next days would be difficult. He did not know what the investigation would reveal. But he knew one thing: he could not ignore what he had found. The truth was now in his hands, and he had to face it. The sheriff arrived in the afternoon. He was a tall man with a calm voice and serious eyes. He had a notebook in his hand and a look that made Ethan feel both relieved and nervous. The deputy introduced them, and the sheriff asked Ethan to show him the barn again. Ethan walked behind the sheriff, feeling the weight of every step. The barn door creaked as they entered, and the air inside felt colder than before. The sheriff turned on his flashlight and carefully walked toward the hidden room. When he saw the body, his face changed. He did not show shock or fear like Ethan had, but his expression grew very serious. The sheriff spoke softly. "This is not something you find every day," he said. "We need to treat this carefully." Ethan nodded. "I don't know how long it has been here," he said, "but it looks old." The sheriff looked around the room, examining the walls and the floor. He asked Ethan questions about the property and how he had found the room. Ethan answered honestly, describing the locked door and the hidden space. The sheriff listened carefully, taking notes. He asked Ethan if he had touched anything or moved anything. Ethan shook his head. The sheriff then said he would call a team from the state to help. He explained that this might be a historical case and not a modern crime. He said it was possible that the person had been dead for a long time. He told Ethan not to worry, but he also warned him that this discovery could attract attention. He asked Ethan to keep the matter private for now. After the sheriff left, Ethan felt a strange emptiness. He had hoped the investigation would bring answers quickly, but now he realized it might take a long time. He returned to the house and sat down, trying to calm his mind. The farm felt even quieter now, as if the land itself was waiting for the truth to be revealed. That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down everything he remembered. He wrote about the way the room looked, the patterns on the clothing, the way the body was positioned. He wrote about the strange feeling he had felt when he first saw the body. He wrote down the stories he had heard from the man at the diner and the librarian. He wanted to keep everything in one place in case he needed it later. The next day, Ethan received a call from the sheriff. The sheriff said that a team would arrive in 2 days. They would include experts who could examine the body and the room. Ethan felt nervous but also relieved. He hoped the experts could tell him who the person was and what had happened. During the 2 days, Ethan continued cleaning the farm. He worked hard, not because he wanted to ignore the mystery, but because he needed something to keep his mind busy. He fixed broken boards, cleaned the windows, and removed old trash. He tried to make the place feel more like a home, even though the barn still held the secret. As he worked, he noticed that the farm was not as empty as he had thought. He saw small signs of life. Birds built nests in the trees. A rabbit ran across the field. The wind moved through the grass in waves. The land seemed to be alive in a quiet way. It made Ethan feel a little less afraid. It reminded him that life continued, even in a place with a dark past. On the second day, the experts arrived. They came in a truck with equipment and boxes. There were 2 men and 1 woman. The woman introduced herself as a historian. The men were from the state's forensic team. They wore gloves and carried cameras. They looked serious and professional. Ethan showed them the barn and the hidden room. The historian walked slowly, looking at the walls and the body. She asked Ethan questions about the property and the history. Ethan answered as best as he could. The forensic men took photos and measured the room. They looked at the body carefully, but they did not touch it at first. The historian spoke softly. "This looks like a burial site," she said. "It may not be a modern crime, it could be a historical event. We need to handle this with respect." Ethan felt a mix of relief and sadness. He wanted to know the truth, but he also felt the weight of the situation. He realized that this was not just a mystery. It was a person's life, and now the person was being examined like an object. The forensic team worked carefully. They used special tools to check the body and the room. They took samples from the clothing and the markings on the skin. They looked for signs of age, and they tried to estimate how long the person had been there. They also examined the beam and the rope that held the body. The historian asked Ethan if he knew anything about the patterns on the clothing. Ethan showed her the photos he had taken. The historian looked at them closely and nodded. "These patterns are very old," she said. "They are similar to designs used by Native American tribes. The clothing looks like it could be from the Apache culture." Ethan felt a sudden chill. He had heard the word before, but he did not know much about the Apache people. He knew they had lived in the Southwest long ago and that they had faced many challenges. He did not know that their history was connected to this farm. The historian continued, "If this is an Apache warrior, then this is a very important discovery. We need to contact the tribal leaders. They have a right to know." Ethan nodded. He felt a deep respect for the historian's words. He realized that this was not just a case for the authorities. It was a matter of history and culture. He felt a strong sense of responsibility. The forensic team worked for hours. They took notes and samples. They did not move the body yet. They wanted to make sure everything was done correctly. The historian asked Ethan to stay calm and to not touch anything. Ethan agreed, but he felt restless. He wanted answers, and he wanted them now. As the day went on, the team began to discuss what they had found. The historian explained that the markings on the skin looked like symbols that were used for protection and strength. The clothing looked like it had been made with care. The person was not just an ordinary man. He looked like a warrior, someone respected in his community. The forensic men said the body was very old. They could not yet estimate the exact age, but they believed it had been there for many years. The rope looked old, and the wood in the room looked worn. They said it was possible that the body had been there for decades, maybe even longer. Ethan felt a strange feeling in his chest. He realized that the person had been left in that room for a very long time. He had been forgotten, or perhaps hidden. Ethan felt a deep sadness for the man. He had never known his name, but now he felt connected to him in a way he could not explain. The historian asked Ethan about the family who had owned the farm before him. Ethan told her what he knew. He explained that the previous owner had lived alone and did not talk to anyone. He did not know much about the family history. The historian listened carefully. "We will need to look into the records," she said. "We need to know who owned this land and what happened here. There may be more to the story than we think." Ethan felt a growing fear. He had always thought of the farm as a peaceful place, but now he realized it might have been a place of conflict. He wondered if the previous owner knew about the body. He wondered if the owner had hidden it on purpose. The team finished their work for the day. They told Ethan they would return with more equipment and possibly more experts. They also said they would contact the tribal leaders and the state historian. Ethan felt a mix of relief and fear. He was glad the work was being done, but he was also afraid of what they might find. That night, Ethan sat alone in the house. The wind moved through the trees and the barn creaked in the distance. He tried to think about other things, but his mind kept returning to the hidden room. He kept imagining the person hanging there, alone and forgotten. He thought about the land and the history. He thought about the stories he had heard at the diner and the library. He wondered if the land had been the site of a battle or a conflict. He wondered if the person had been punished unfairly. He wondered if the land had been taken from people who had once lived there. Ethan felt a deep sadness for the people who had suffered in the past. He realized that the farm was not just a piece of land. It was a place where history had happened. He began to understand that the past was not far away. It was still present, hidden beneath the surface. He knew that the next days would bring more answers, but he also knew that the answers might be difficult to hear. He felt a responsibility to respect the person he had found. He felt a duty to find the truth, even if it was painful. As he went to bed, Ethan promised himself that he would not forget the person in the hidden room. He would do everything he could to help the truth come out. He did not know what the future would bring, but he knew that his life had changed. 4 of the days after the experts left were filled with waiting. Ethan tried to keep himself busy with work around the farm, but his mind kept returning to the hidden room. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a deep river, watching the water flow, not knowing what was under the surface. Every sound on the farm seemed louder now. The wind in the trees, the creak of the barn, even the distant call of a bird felt like a reminder of the mystery he had uncovered. He checked his phone often, waiting for a message from the sheriff or the historian. He wanted answers, but he also feared them. He did not know what the truth would reveal. He had a feeling that the story would not be simple. Then one afternoon his phone rang. It was the sheriff. "We have news," the sheriff said. "We've been in contact with the tribal historian. They want to meet with you." Ethan's heart began to beat faster. He felt a mix of fear and relief. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," the sheriff replied. "We will meet at the town hall. Bring anything you have. The tribal leaders want to understand the situation." Ethan hung up and sat down slowly. He felt a strange feeling, like the ground was shifting under him. The next day would be important. He would meet people who had a connection to the land and the person he had found. He wondered how they would react. He wondered if they would be angry or sad or both. That night, Ethan gathered everything he had. He printed the photos from his phone and placed them in a folder. He wrote down his memories of the hidden room, the clothing, the markings, and the way the body was positioned. He wrote down the stories he had heard in the town. He wanted to be prepared. He wanted to tell the truth clearly. He also felt a strong need to learn more. He opened the books he had borrowed from the library and read about the Apache people. He learned that the Apache were known for their strength, bravery, and deep connection to the land. They had faced many challenges, including wars and forced relocation. Ethan read about the importance of family and community in their culture. He read about their traditions and the way they respected their ancestors. As he read, he felt a deeper connection to the person he had found. He began to understand that the body was not just a mystery. It was a person who had once been part of a community. The person had a name, a family, and a life. Ethan felt a strong desire to honor that life. The next morning, Ethan drove to the town hall. He arrived early and sat in his car, feeling nervous. He watched people arrive. Some were from the town and some were from the tribal community. He saw men and women dressed in traditional clothing. He felt a mix of emotions. He felt honored to meet them, but he also felt scared. He did not know what to say. A woman approached his car and introduced herself. She was calm and kind, with a strong presence. She said she was a representative of the tribal council. She explained that the tribal leaders had heard about the discovery and wanted to learn more. She asked Ethan to come inside. Ethan followed her into the building. Inside, the room was simple and quiet. There were chairs arranged in a circle and a table in the center. The air felt calm, but Ethan could feel the seriousness of the moment. The tribal leaders sat in their chairs, and the sheriff stood at the side. Ethan felt like he was stepping into a story that had been waiting for years. The woman who had guided him spoke first. "We are here because we want to understand what happened on our land," she said. "We want to know who this person is and why he was left here. We want to honor him." Ethan nodded. He felt his throat tighten. He spoke slowly, telling them what he had found. He described the hidden room, the body, the clothing, and the markings. He showed them the photos and the notes he had written. He told them about the way the room felt, the silence, and the heavy air. The tribal leaders listened carefully. They did not speak much, but their faces showed that they were paying attention. After Ethan finished, the woman asked him if he had any idea how long the person had been there. Ethan shook his head. "The experts said it could be many years," he said. "They said the body looked very old." The woman nodded slowly. "We will need to perform a ceremony to honor him," she said. "But first, we need to know who he is." Ethan felt a strong emotion. He realized that the tribal leaders were not just interested in the mystery. They were concerned about the person's identity and dignity. They wanted to give him a proper place in their history. The tribal leader then spoke. "We believe this person may be one of our warriors," he said. "But we cannot be sure without evidence. We will need to examine the markings and the clothing. We will also need to look into our records and stories." Ethan nodded. He felt a sense of relief that they were taking the matter seriously. He also felt a sense of sadness, knowing that the person had been hidden for so long. The tribal leader continued. "We also want to understand why he was left here," he said. "If he was killed or punished, we need to know who did it and why. We need to bring justice if possible." Ethan felt a chill. He had not expected the conversation to move in that direction. He had thought the story would be about history, not justice. But now he understood that the truth might involve wrongdoing. The sheriff spoke up. "We will help in any way we can," he said. "If there is evidence of a crime, we will investigate, but we need to be careful. This may involve events that happened many years ago." The tribal leaders nodded. The woman then asked Ethan if he would allow them to bring a team to the farm to examine the site. Ethan agreed. He felt that it was the right thing to do. He felt that he owed it to the person he had found. The meeting ended with a plan. The tribal leaders would bring their team and the experts would return. They would examine the body and the site. They would look for evidence and try to learn the person's identity. They would also prepare a ceremony to honor the person once they knew who he was. Ethan left the town hall feeling both hopeful and worried. He felt like he was stepping into something bigger than himself. He wondered what the next days would bring. He felt a sense of responsibility, but he also felt that he was not alone. The tribal community and the authorities were working together, and that gave him a sense of comfort. When he returned to the farm, he found the land looking different. The wind moved through the grass and the sun felt brighter. The farm no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like a place where truth could be found. Ethan walked to the barn and stood outside for a moment. He thought about the person in the hidden room and the possibility that the person would finally be recognized. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He kept thinking about the tribal leaders and the ceremony they had mentioned. He wondered what it would feel like to be part of something that honored a person he had never known. He felt a deep respect for the culture and the people who had come to help. As he lay in bed, he thought about his own life. He realized that he had come to the farm looking for a fresh start, but now he was part of a story that had been hidden for years. He realized that the land had chosen him, in a way. He felt that he had a duty to help bring the truth to light. The next morning, he woke up early and walked to the barn. He stood outside and looked at the hidden door. He felt a sense of calm. He knew that the truth would not be easy, but he was ready to face it. He had already come so far, and he could not turn back now. He took a deep breath and walked into the barn. The air inside felt quiet but not heavy. He walked to the hidden room and stood there for a moment. He thought about the person hanging there, and he whispered a small prayer, even though he was not sure if anyone would hear it. He promised himself that he would do everything he could to help the person be remembered. He would help the tribal community find answers. He would help the truth come out, no matter how difficult it might be. And so, as the sun rose over the land, Ethan prepared for the next step. The investigation was moving forward, and the truth was closer than ever. The farm was no longer just a piece of land. It was a place where a story was waiting to be told, and Ethan was ready to be part of that story. The morning was calm and bright. Ethan woke early and felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Today, the tribal team and the experts would arrive at the farm. He got dressed quickly, ate a small breakfast, and stepped outside. The sun was warm on his face, and the wind moved gently through the dry grass. The farm felt alive, almost as if it knew something important was about to happen. Within an hour, a group of people arrived. There were historians, archaeologists, and several members of the tribal council. They were quiet, respectful, and moved with purpose. The sheriff was there too, standing near the barn. Ethan greeted everyone and led them toward the hidden door. He felt nervous, but also a strange sense of pride. He was part of something important, something bigger than himself. The tribal leaders stepped inside the barn carefully. Their faces were serious, yet calm. One of the elders approached the hidden door and touched it lightly. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered words in a language Ethan did not understand. The sound was soft but powerful. It filled the barn and made the air feel heavy, yet sacred. Ethan watched silently as the elders entered the hidden room. The body was still hanging, untouched. The historian and the forensic team began their careful examination, taking notes and recording every detail. They measured the rope, the wooden beam, and even the way the body was positioned. Ethan stayed near the doorway, not wanting to interfere but wanting to be close. One of the tribal leaders knelt near the body. She ran her fingers lightly over the clothing, examining the patterns. Her expression was calm but full of respect. She spoke softly to the others, explaining what the symbols meant. Ethan listened, feeling a mix of awe and sadness. He realized that this person had been important, a warrior with a life, a family, and a place in his community. The forensic experts continued their work. They took small samples from the clothing and markings, careful not to disturb the body. The historian recorded every detail and compared it with the photos Ethan had taken. Together, they tried to estimate the age of the body and the time it had been in the hidden room. They worked quietly with precision and care. After a few hours, the elder spoke to Ethan. "This man was a warrior," she said. He lived a long time ago during a time of struggle for our people. His clothing and the markings tell us he was respected and brave. But it seems he was separated from his community before he died. Ethan's heart tightened. Separated? He asked softly. The elder nodded. We do not know exactly why. Perhaps he was captured or perhaps he was hiding. What matters now is that we honor him and remember him. Ethan felt tears in his eyes. He had never met this man, yet he felt a connection stronger than anything he had felt in years. The warrior's story had become part of his own. He realized that discovering the hidden room had changed him. He could no longer see the farm as just a property. It was a place of memory, of history, and of respect. The tribal leaders decided to perform a small ceremony at the site. They brought blankets, herbs, and small items used in traditional rituals. They asked Ethan to step back and observe. The ceremony began with soft chants and prayers. The elders spoke words of honor, calling upon the spirits of the land and the ancestors. The air in the barn felt sacred, alive with history and respect. Ethan watched as the leaders gently removed the body from the hanging position and placed it carefully on a prepared blanket. They spoke softly, explaining that the warrior was being returned to his rightful place in memory. Ethan felt a wave of emotion. He realized that this moment was not just about the past, it was about healing and acknowledgement. After the ceremony, the tribal leaders thanked Ethan for his honesty and bravery. They explained that his actions had allowed them to honor the warrior properly. Ethan felt humbled. He had not expected to become part of such an important story, yet here he was, helping to bring closure to a long-forgotten life. The historian took photographs for records and planned to include the discovery in research about the Apache people and their history. The forensic experts collected the samples they needed for further study. The tribal leaders promised to return the warrior's remains to a ceremonial resting place, ensuring that he would be honored in the way his community intended. Ethan spent the rest of the day walking around the farm, reflecting on everything that had happened. The land felt peaceful now, different from the first time he had arrived. The barn, once a place of fear and mystery, now felt like a place of respect and history. He understood that the farm was more than property. It was a witness to history, carrying stories that had been hidden for generations. That evening, Ethan sat on the porch of the farmhouse and watched the sun set over the fields. The sky was painted with orange, pink, and purple colors. He felt calm, yet deeply moved. He thought about the warrior, his life, and the struggles he had endured. Ethan realized that finding the hidden room had given him a new perspective on life. It had taught him about respect, responsibility, and the importance of remembering the past. Over the next few weeks, the experts and tribal leaders worked together to document the discovery fully. Ethan provided all the information he had, answering questions and helping with details about the farm. He visited the barn often, not with fear, but with a sense of connection. The farm, once silent and empty, had become a place of learning, reflection, and remembrance. Ethan also began to think about his own life. He realized that he had come to the farm looking for a simple escape, a new beginning. Instead, he had found a story that changed his understanding of history and responsibility. He felt a sense of purpose, knowing that he had helped bring closure to someone's life, even after so many years. Months later, the warrior was finally given a proper resting place, accompanied by a ceremonial gathering that honored his life and bravery. Ethan attended, feeling proud and deeply moved. He had helped to write a small part of history, ensuring that the warrior's life was remembered and respected. The farm itself began to change as well. Ethan continued to repair and care for the buildings. He planted gardens and tended to the land, not just for himself, but as a way to honor the memory of the past. The fields were no longer just empty land. They were a reminder of the lives that had been lived there and the history that had been preserved. Ethan knew he would never forget the experience. The hidden room, the discovery of the warrior, and the connection to the tribal community had changed him forever. He had learned about courage, respect, and the importance of remembering those who came before. As he sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars appear in the sky, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. The farm was quiet, but it was no longer lonely. It was full of life, memory, and history. He realized that some stories, no matter how hidden, will always find a way to be told. And now he was part of that story too. Ethan smiled and leaned back in his chair. The land stretched out before him, wide and endless. He understood now that the farm was not just a place he inherited. It was a place that had chosen him, a place where the past and present met, and where respect and remembrance could live forever. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky darkened to deep blue. The wind moved softly through the grass, carrying with it a sense of calm and completion. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of the warrior and the story he had helped uncover. He knew that history was never truly lost. It was waiting for someone to remember it. And he had done just that. The farm, once silent and forgotten, now held a legacy of life, courage, and honor. And Ethan, the ordinary man who had inherited an old farm, had become the guardian of that story. He had found more than land. He had found connection, purpose, and a sense of belonging he had never felt before.